Hi, everybody. This is Cathleen Scott, and welcome to the Cathleen Scott podcast. Today is our one of a few podcast series celebrating workers everywhere leading up to Labor Day. This is episode 1, when work had no rules. So we're going to do a little history of labor law. So imagine going to work tomorrow knowing that there's no protections for you. There's no unemployment. There's no protection. There's no minimum wage. There's no overtime payments. If you get hurt at work, you're basically done. If you get killed at work, your family gets nothing. There's no child labor laws. There's no paid leave. There's no protection against harassment or discrimination or wrongful discharge. That's what the workplace was like before the 1930s. And it's where we had this legal definition of employment called master and servant. And it very much was the case. Life before labor law meant long hours, meant kids in the workplace working jobs that are unimaginable today. It means no protections. Having a job wasn't really so much as a choice. You really had to go there and take it or lose your position. Initially, pre-1930s, agricultural work was kind of like the work that people did out in the fields. And this was hard work, of course, but also you could be close to your home, and you could be close to your families, and artisans and individuals could develop trades and make good money and provide for their family. The Industrial Revolution changed all of that. We saw sort of the opening of textile mills, of coal mills, of railroads, factories, and as a result of that technological change, the jobs became exceedingly more difficult. Machines dictated the work. They dictated the speed of the work, and the long as machines could run, workers had to be there to run them. The hours were long, and they pretty much were whatever were dictated, and people had to move to cities to get these higher paying jobs. Workers were easily replaced. Immigrant families relied on every single dollar, and children became very much a part of the workforce. And this was probably one of the largest changes that we see in child labor from the shift from farm worker to the Industrial Revolution. Of course, kids did work out in the agriculture, but agriculture wasn't a year-long thing. It was harvest season. That's one of the reasons why our school calendar is the way that it is. Kids get out of school at the time for the harvest, and that's why we had the summer vacation. It wasn't all year of tedious hours. The Industrial Revolution changed all that. So just to get a little idea of what a worker would make after the Industrial Revolution, a factory laborer would earn about $450 to $600 per year. Okay, just let that sink in. And how that relates to like a living wage, 40% of the overall income cost to a household was for food. Everyday prices were things like 5 cents for bread, 9 cents for milk. A steak was 20 cents if you could afford it, and that's per pound. So a paycheck rarely reached the $800 a family would need. So what happened? Young children and wives went into the workforce. And what we saw is over 1.5 to 2 million children. And I mean children, I don't just mean under 18. I mean children starting at the age of like 9 and 10 years old. 1 in 6 child was working for lower than any type of livable wage. And so where did they go to work? They worked in cotton fields, farms, canneries, glass factories, textile, coal mines. They even worked in railroad, in the newsboys. Some of you might remember those. Very few people are probably alive to remember much of that, but they were messengers and they worked in industrial shops and they worked long hours. Imagine, if you will, your 10-year-old waking up in the morning and leaving the house. He's not going to a school bus. He's not bringing books. He's going to work in the workforce. He's going to a mill, probably, and he's going to work 10 or 11 hours a day without a lunch break, without any OSHA protections, without any safety. That's what it was like in the Industrial Revolution for children. So the child who should have been in school actually was help providing a wage so that their family could survive. Some of the types of jobs that they did, I mentioned, they picked through coal, they sold newspapers, they stood for long hours, they had to breathe in dust and smoke and fumes. It's pretty horrific. There's a famous photographer, his name is Lewis Hine, and he is somebody who would bring light to children being exploited in the workplace. This was his specialty. And some of his photography is all over. It's famous for some of the things that he brought to light. Nothing brings things to the attention of the public like a good photograph, right? A picture tells 1,000 words. His work mattered for many reasons. It mattered because most Americans never really saw a child labor. There was a really big divide in the country between those who were very poor and those who were able to live and exist and do well. And so employers obviously didn't want this sort of thing being photographed, didn't want it to be made public. And so often it's the case in our country that reform follows visibility. And that's exactly what Louis Hine did. And I wanted to show you some of those photographs, some of you may have heard of. This was a very common job for young children to do. And you can look here, these kids are quite young. There's two young women. They're barely 48 inches tall. If you look how tall those spinning machines were, and again, notice the bare feet. So the next one is called the Breaker Boys. This is a picture. The photographer, again, is Louis Hine, and he's taken a picture of boys who are hunched over, and their job was to sort through coal to get out any kind of rocks and to pick out slate and rock by hand. That would often expose them to the black dust of coal. And so you can take a good look at this picture and see them hunched over, which is the position that they would hold for hours and hours a day. And take a look at the guy in the back. That's called the overseer. Very ominous title, probably appropriate. So when kids worked in coal mills, it was very common for them to get crushed or cut fingers. They had respiratory problems. They were exhausted. They had long-term health consequences. This one hits a little close to home because this coal mill where that picture was taken is really close to where I was born, near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So this wasn't a summer job, and I want to underscore this. These kids did not go to school. They went to the coal mill, and they earned money for their family so they could eat. The third one here is Newsies, which is at Skeeter's Branch. This is a picture from 1910. These are the so-called newsboys. They're young boys who, extra, read all about it. You've seen this done 1,000 times on Broadway and other been glamorized. But the reality is these kids sold cigarettes and they sold newspaper. They wore caps and clothes, and they stood outside in the city streets and worked, often alone, late into the evening, selling their wares, whatever they could, for a small amount of change. So you can imagine with that backdrop, these pictures became public. They really did force a change, and the workforce slowly started to change. And so we see in 1935 and 1938, the new laws were passed. One of them is the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is a law we regularly represent employees on today, which protects not only child workers, but it also protects individuals to make sure they're being paid a minimum wage and also being paid overtime. And that all started really as a large result of some of these travesties that were happening to young people who are out there working. And so now we're moving into, and we'll cover it in our next episode, really what happened post-1938 after these laws were passed and how that shaped the workforce. I think the takeaway here really is the importance of bringing truth to power and shedding light on things when workers are not being treated well and how that's bad for everybody, right? We want our kids going to school, not going to work at 10 years old. And we've come far, but we haven't come far enough. This is our first series of many as we get to Labor Day. I'm Cathleen Scott, and this is the Cathleen Scott podcast celebrating labor and workers everywhere. Hope you join us on the next episode. If you like what you've seen, please feel free to subscribe. See you next time.